The forgotten promise the redwoods towered overhead, filtering the morning light into dusty beams that spotted the forest floor. Elise Harper shouldered her backpack and checked the trail map one more time. She had 3 days of solitude ahead exactly, what she needed after finalizing her divorce papers last week. At 32, starting over hadn't been in her plans. But neither was staying with someone who made promises he never intended to keep. A voice startled her from behind. She turned to find a man with tousled dark hair and eyes the color of amber studying her map. His smile revealed a slight dimple in his right cheek. "Just double-checking," she replied, folding the map. "The Osprey Trail should be a left at the fork ahead." "Actually, it's a right," he said, pointing to a different section of the map. "I've hiked these trails since I was a kid." Nathan Rivera. He extended his hand. "Elise." She shook it, noticing the calluses on his palm. "Thanks for the correction. Would have ended up in Oregon at this rate." "You're staying at the Redwood Retreat?" When she nodded, he continued, "Same here. Mind if I walk with you? The trail gets a bit tricky near the river crossing." They hiked together, conversation flowing easily between topics of work. She was a librarian considering opening her own bookstore. He was an environmental engineer working on sustainable building designs. Favorite trails, she preferred coastal. He loved forests. And what had brought them to the retreat? She carefully avoided mentioning her divorce, saying only she needed perspective. He was taking a rare break from a demanding project. By evening, they were sharing a table at the retreats. Communal dinner, laughing like old friends. By the campfire that night, his hand found hers in the darkness. And when the weekend drew to a close, they had barely left each other's cabin, discovering a connection that felt both urgent and timeless. "I've never done this before," she whispered Sunday morning, watching him dress. "Met someone and just ... fallen." He smiled, sitting beside her on the rumpled bed. "Me neither. I've always been too focused on work, on the next project." "What happens now?" she asked. Nathan traced her cheek with his finger. "I have to head back to Seattle tomorrow, but I'm back in California next month. Can I see you then?" "I'd like that." She wrote her number on the retreat's stationery folding, it carefully into his palm. "Don't lose this. I promise." He kissed her deeply. This weekend wasn't just a distraction, Elise. This was something real. That evening, they watched the sunset from the retreat's highest viewpoint, making plans for the future trip too. His favorite hiking spot in the Cascades, introducing her to his sister's family, exploring the bookstores of Seattle together. But when Elise woke the next morning, Nathan was gone. His cabin was empty, bed neatly made as though he'd never been. There, at the front desk, they said he'd checked out before dawn, leaving no message. She called the number he'd given her, only to find it disconnected. For weeks, she searched online, called environmental firms in Seattle, even drove to the address. He'd mentioned in passing, nothing, Nathan. Rivera had vanished as completely as morning mist in the redwoods. By the time she realized she was pregnant, 2 months had passed. And Elise made a decision. Some promises weren't worth remembering. Solitary bloomed the bell above the door of Tidewater Books jingled cheerfully as Elise looked up from the sales counter. Now she owned. This small bookshop nestled between a cafe and an art gallery in the coastal town of Sandpoint, where the fog rolled in each morning and retreated with the afternoon sun.
"Mom, look what I found."
Lucas came bounding down the children's section aisle, his hazel eyes bright with excitement. At 4.5, he was all boundless energy and curiosity, with a dimple in his right cheek that appeared whenever he smiled, a constant reminder of the man who had vanished from her life. Lucas thrust a picture book about ocean creatures toward her. "Can we read about the whales tonight?" "Absolutely." Elise ruffled his dark hair, so similar to Nathan's in both color and texture. "Put it by the register, and we'll take it home after closing." Her son scampered off, and Elise found herself doing what she often did when Lucas wasn't looking, studying him, cataloging the features that came from her, the slightly upturned nose, the determined set of his chin, those that belonged to Nathan. The way Lucas's eyebrows drew together when he concentrated, and part-time employee Dahlia waved a hand in front of her face. "You disappeared on me there." "Sorry." Elise smiled. Just thinking about the new shipment coming tomorrow. Dahlia gave her a knowing look. The new shipment that happens to look exactly like his father when he's focused on something? Everyone else in Sandpoint, Dahlia knew the truth about Lucas's father. Not the complete story, Elise had kept the intensity of those 3 days private, but enough to understand why Elise never dated and why she changed the subject. Whenever well-meaning locals tried to set her up with someone, he's starting to ask more questions, Elise admitted quietly, restacking a display of bestsellers. About why other kids have dads and he doesn't. What do you tell him? The families come in all different shapes. Said he has me and Grandma Jane and his Aunt Dahlia, who loves him very much. She sighed. But someday that won't be enough. The afternoon passed in a comfortable rhythm of customers, book recommendations, and catching up with the regulars who came as much for conversation as for reading material. By closing time, Lucas had built a fort out of cushions in the reading nook and was halfway through a picture book about penguins, sounding out words with determination. At home, the small blue cottage. A 10-minute walk from the shop. Elise prepared dinner while Lucas colored at the kitchen table. Their evening routine was well established. Dinner, bath time, stories. And then Lucas would fall asleep clutching his favorite stuffed otter while Elise retreated to the porch with a glass of wine and whatever book she was currently reading tonight. However, Lucas pushed his dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets around his plate with unusual thoughtfulness. Miss Patel is having career day at school next week. She said we can bring our dads to talk about their jobs. Elise's heart constricted. I told her I'd bring Uncle Tom instead, Lucas continued, referring to Dahlia's husband, who often took Lucas fishing on weekends. Is that okay? Of course it's okay. Elise reached across the table to squeeze his hand. Uncle Tom would. Love that. But ... double quotes. Lucas's lower lip trembled slightly. Jamie says everyone has a dad somewhere, even if they don't live together. Do I have a dad somewhere, Mom? The question she'd been dreading for years hung in the air between them. Elise had promised herself she would never lie to her son, but how much truth could a 4-year-old understand? Yes, she said finally. You have a dad. He had to go away before you were born, before I even knew about you. Didn't he want to meet me? Lucas's voice was small. Elise moved to kneel beside his chair, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. Sometimes grown-ups make choices before they have all the information. Like when I chose the green backpack, but the blue one had a secret pocket. Elise smiled despite the ache in her chest. Something like that. Later, after Lucas was asleep, Elise sat on her porch steps watching waves crash against the shore in the distance. She pulled out her phone and did what she hadn't allowed herself to do in years. She searched for Nathan Rivera. To her surprise, his name appeared immediately in an article dated just 3 days ago. Environmental engineer Nathan Rivera to lead innovative marine conservation project in Sandpoint. The phone nearly slipped from her fingers. After 5 years of silence, Nathan wasn't just reappearing somewhere in the world. He was coming here. To her town, to Lucas's world. Her peaceful life was about to be upended completely, and Elise had no idea how to prepare for the storm that was coming. Storms collide. The Coastal Commission meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Sandpoint Community Center, and Elise had spent the morning trying to convince herself not to attend. She'd closed the bookstore early, telling Dahlia she needed to catch up on inventory, but instead found herself standing before her closet, changing outfits 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes. This is ridiculous, she muttered to herself, checking her reflection one last time. She wasn't going to confront him, not yet anyway. She just needed to see him, to confirm that the Nathan Rivera coming to town was truly the same man from 5 years ago. The community center was packed when she arrived. Locals curious about the proposed marine research facility that promised both environmental benefits and new jobs. Lee slipped into a seat near the back, scanning the room until she spotted him at the front. Organizing presentation materials with 2 colleagues, 5 years had added subtle touches of silver at his temples, lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled at something his colleague said. But otherwise, Nathan looked remarkably the same, tall and broad-shouldered in a tailored navy suit. With that same focused intensity she remembered so well, the meeting began. When Nathan stepped to the podium to outline the conservation project, Elise found herself holding her breath. His voice was exactly as she remembered, warm and confident, with a slight raspiness when he emphasized important points. The Sandpoint Marine Research Center will focus on kelp forest restoration and sustainable aquaculture, he explained, gesturing to diagrams projected behind him. Our designs incorporate renewable energy systems and minimal disruption to the existing shoreline ecosystem. As he fielded questions from the audience, Elise was struck by how passionately he spoke about protecting the ocean, about creating a legacy of environmental stewardship. The irony wasn't lost on her at this man who cared so deeply about future. Generations had a son he knew nothing about. When the meeting concluded, Elise slipped out quickly, not ready for a confrontation in such a public setting. She needed time to process, to plan how and when to tell him about Lucas's fate. However, had other ideas. The following afternoon, Lucas was having a play date with his friend Oliver at Tidepool Cafe, the small eatery next to her bookshop. Elise sat at a corner table with Oliver's mother, Josephine, sipping coffee while the boys colored, and shared a plate of fries. She was midway through a story about a particularly demanding customer when the cafe door opened, and Nathan walked in with one of his colleagues from the presentation. Elise froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. Nathan hadn't noticed her yet, focused on the menu board above the counter. She could still escape, make some excuse to Josephine, grab Lucas and leave before Mom. Look at my octopus. Lucas called out, holding up his drawing with pride. Nathan's head turned at the child's voice, his gaze landing first on Lucas, then shifting to Elise. The recognition was immediate. She saw it in the way his body stiffened, in the widening of his eyes. What she hadn't expected was how quickly his attention returned to Lucas, his expression transforming from surprise to something like wonder as he took in the boy's features.
Elise,
He said, her name sounding like a question and an answer all at once. Josephine looked between them, sensing the sudden tension. Everything okay? It's fine, Elise managed, setting down her cup with a trembling hand. An old acquaintance, Nathan, approached their table slowly, as if giving her time to flee. His colleague, sensing something personal unfolding, tactfully moved to a table on the other side of the cafe. It's really you, Nathan said quietly. His eyes drifted to Lucas again, lingering on the boy's profile with unmistakable recognition. I didn't know you lived in Sandpoint. For almost 5 years now, Elise replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Lucas looked up, suddenly aware of the tall stranger standing beside their table. Hi, he said with the easy friendliness of childhood. Do you want to see my drawing? It's an octopus with 3 hearts. Lucas, Elise began, unsure how to navigate this moment she'd imagined countless times but was entirely unprepared for. Nathan crouched down to Lucas's eye level, his movement deliberate and careful. That's a great octopus. You're right about. The 3 hearts. Most people don't know that fact, Mom told me. She knows lots of animal facts. Lucas beamed with pride. She owns the bookstore next door, and we have a whole shelf of ocean books. Is that so? Nathan's voice was gentle, but his eyes, when they met Elise's over their son's head, were filled with questions. Josephine, perceptive enough to sense the undercurrents, stood and touched Oliver's shoulder. We should head out, buddy. Dad's waiting for us at home. After they left, an awkward silence descended. Lucas, oblivious to the tension, continued coloring, occasionally asking Nathan questions about octopuses, which he answered with remarkable patience despite the obvious shock still evident in his expression. Finally, Elise took a deep breath. Lucas, this is Mr. Rivera. He's an old friend of mine. Lucas asked innocently. Yes, she said, meeting Nathan's gaze directly. From before you were born. The implications of her words weren't lost on Nathan. She could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Lucas's age, the timing, the undeniable resemblance. How old are you, Lucas? Nathan asked, his voice carefully controlled. 4.5, Lucas answered proudly, holding up the appropriate number of fingers. I'll be 5 in November. Nathan's gaze locked with Elise's, and in that moment, The years between them collapsed. Oh. She saw the exact second comprehension dawned fully, the slight widening of his eyes, the sharp intake of breath. November, he repeated softly. 9 months. After February, Luce's bored with the adult conversation, returned to his coloring. Elise gathered her courage and met Nathan's stunned expression with a steady gaze. "We should talk," she said quietly, "but not here." Buried truths. The sunset cast long shadows across Elise's back porch as she poured 2 glasses of wine. Lucas was at Dahlia's for a sleepover, an arrangement Elise had made with a single desperate phone call after the cafe encounter, explaining only that Lucas's father had unexpectedly appeared and she needed space for an adult conversation. Nathan stood at the railings, looking out at her small garden where evidence of Lucas was everywhere. Miniature soccer ball, a half-built Lego structure protected by an upturned plastic tub, child-sized gardening set leaning against the fence. "He's incredible," Nathan said, accepting the wine glass she offered. "Smart, curious, he has your smile." "And your dimple," Elise replied. "And your eyebrows. And your habit of tapping your fingers when you're thinking." She took a steadying breath. "I saw those similarities every day for 5 years." The accusation hung unspoken between them. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, another gesture Lucas had somehow inherited. "You must hate me," he said finally. "I did," Elise admitted. "For a long time. Then I was too busy raising our son to waste energy on hating someone who'd clearly wanted nothing to do with us." "That's not," Nathan set his glass down with more force than necessary. "I didn't know, Elise. How could I have known? You never contacted me." "Contacted you." Disbelief colored her voice. "The number you gave me was disconnected. I drove to Seattle looking for you. I called every environmental engineering firm in Washington state. You disappeared completely." Nathan's expression shifted from defensive to confused. "What are you talking about?" "Left you a note with my real number. The one I gave you that first day was my temporary work line. It was only active during the project I was finishing." "There was no note, Nathan. Nothing. You were just gone." He sank into one of her porch chairs, realization dawning on his face. "I left it on the bedside table at the retreat. With flowers. I had to leave at dawn for an emergency, but I explained everything in the note." "What emergency?" Elise remained standing, arms crossed protectively over her chest. Nathan stared into his wine glass for a long moment before answering. "My father had a heart attack. My sister called at 4 in the morning. He was in critical condition, and the doctors weren't sure he'd make it." He looked up at her. I wrote that I had to go to Portland immediately, that I'd call when I could. I left my personal cell number and my home address. "I never got any note," Elise said, her certainty wavering for the first time in years. "When I woke up, your cabin was empty. The retreat staff said you'd checked out before dawn. Because I had to catch the first flight to Portland." Frustration and old grief colored his voice. "My father died 3 days later. By the time I came up for air, weeks had passed, and you hadn't called or texted, I assumed." "You assumed what?" "That I was just a weekend fling who wasn't worth following up with?" "No," Nathan said softly. "I assumed you'd gotten the note and decided what we had wasn't worth pursuing. People say a lot of things during romantic weekends that don't hold up in the light of day." Elise sat down heavily in the chair opposite him, 5 years of assumptions beginning to crumble. "So when I didn't call, I thought you'd moved on. Then my life imploded anyway." Nathan took a long swallow of wine. "After my father died, I discovered he'd been hiding how bad the family business finances were. He'd mortgaged everything, trying to keep his employees paid through a downturn. I spent the next 2 years working myself to exhaustion trying to save his legacy and make sure 30 families didn't lose their livelihoods." "You could have tried to find me," Elise said, but the accusation had lost its edge. "I did eventually. I went back to the retreat 6 months later, but they wouldn't give me your information privacy policies. You'd never told me your last name. All I had was Elise, librarian from California." He gave a hollow laugh. "Do you know how many librarians named Elise there are in California?"
Ah!
The weight of misconnections and misunderstandings settled between them. For 5 years, they'd each carried a different version of abandonment. Elise believing Nathan had used her and disappeared. Nathan thinking Elise had received his explanation and chosen not to respond. "So you never knew," Elise said quietly. "About Lucas? How could I?" Nathan's voice broke slightly. "Elise, if I had known, nothing would have kept me away. Nothing." The conviction in his voice pierced her heart. For years, she'd constructed a narrative about Nathan, the type of man. Who would leave without saying goodbye? Who wouldn't want the responsibility of a child? She'd prepared herself for the possibility that someday he might reappear and reject. Lucas. She'd never prepared for this genuine shock, regret, and what appeared to be a desperate desire to make things right. "He asks about you," she admitted. Not by name, of course. But he wants to know about his dad, especially lately. "What have you told him?" "That you didn't know about him? That sometimes grown-ups make choices without having all the information?" She met his eyes. "I never told him you abandoned us. I never made you the villain in his story." Nathan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Thank you for that. And thank you for raising such an amazing kid." He hesitated. What happens now? The question hung between them, enormous in its implications. This wasn't just about two people who'd once shared a connection. It was about a little boy whose world would be forever changed by their decisions. "I don't know," Elise answered honestly. "This is uncharted territory for both of us." "I want to know him, Elise." Nathan's voice was resolute. "I've already missed nearly 5 years. I don't want to miss any more. And when your project here is finished, when you go back to your real life?" Nathan leaned forward, his expression intense. "This isn't a temporary interest. He's my son. Whatever we decide, however we structure this, I'm in it for the long haul." Elise studied his face, searching for any hint of hesitation or insincerity. She found none. "We'll need to take it slowly," she said finally. "For Lucas's sake. This will be a lot for him to process. I understand." Nathan nodded. "We follow his lead, his comfort level." As the evening deepened around them, they began the delicate work of reconstructing the past and sketching possibilities for a future neither had imagined possible 24 hours earlier. New foundations, 3 months later. Elise watched from the shore as Nathan crouched beside Lucas in the tidal pool, pointing out a tiny hermit crab making its way across the rocks. Lucas's face was alight with fascination, his small hand occasionally reaching out to touch Nathan's arm for balance as he leaned in for a closer look. The transition had been smoother than she'd dared hope. After careful discussion, they'd introduced Nathan to Lucas as an old friend who just discovered he's actually your dad. Lucas had processed this information with the remarkable adaptability of childhood, his initial confusion giving way to excited curiosity about this new person who looked like him and knew so many things about the ocean. Nathan had approached fatherhood with the same thorough dedication he brought to his engineering projects, researching child development, asking thoughtful questions about Lucas's routines and preferences, and never pushing beyond what Lucas seemed comfortable with. He'd rented a house just 10 minutes from Elise's cottage and adjusted his work schedule to maximize his time with his son. "Mom, Dad found a sea star with 6 arms instead of 5, Lucas called out, waving her over. Excitedly, "He says it's a genetic mutation." Elise smiled and made her way across the sand to join them. The word dad still gave her a strange flutter each time Lucas used it, but it had quickly become natural for him. Children, she'd discovered, had an extraordinary capacity to expand their concept of family when given the chance. "That's pretty special," she said, kneeling beside them to examine the orange sea star. "Just like your special extra freckle." She tapped the distinctive mark on Lucas's wrist that didn't match any of his other freckles. "Do you have any special marks, Dad?" Lucas asked, peering at Nathan with interest. As a matter of fact, Nathan rolled up his sleeve to reveal a small crescent-shaped birthmark on his forearm. "I have this moon shape right here." Lucas's eyes widened. "That's so cool. Both have special marks." The simplicity of his delight made both adults exchange a smile over his head. These moments of genetic recognition had become precious to Nathan, each one a small bridge across the years he'd missed. Later, after they'd returned to Elise's cottage, and Lucas had fallen asleep reading with Nathan on the couch, Elise poured them each a cup of tea and joined Nathan on her back porch. "He asked if you were going to live with us," she said without preamble. Nathan's expression grew serious. "What did you tell him?" "That grown-ups who are parents don't always live together, but they can still both be good parents." She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "But I think he's noticed that. You and I are friendlier than we were at first." The understatement hung in the air between them. Over the past months, as they'd navigated co-parenting and gradually rebuilt trust, something else had been rekindling as well. The easy conversation, the shared humor, the undeniable attraction that had drawn them together 5 years ago. "Are we just friends, Elise?" Nathan asked quietly. She met his gaze. "I don't know what we are. Parents, certainly. Former strangers who shared 3 incredible days once upon a time. 2 people trying to do right by their child. 2 people who still feel something for each other." Nathan set his mug down and turned to face her fully. "I know we've been careful. Taking things slowly for Lucas's sake was the right choice. But I think about you constantly. About what might have been if that note hadn't gone missing, if we'd had a chance to see where things could go." "We can't go back," Elise said, but she didn't pull away when he took her hand. "No, we can't, but we could go forward." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I'm not going anywhere, Elise. The Sandpoint project has been extended for at least 3 years. And even after that, I've been offered a position that would let me be based anywhere on the West Coast." Hope, tentative but undeniable, blossomed in Elise's chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I want to be part of Lucas's life, permanently, and I want to explore what might still be possible between us." His eyes held hers steadily, not rushing, not pushing, just ... Open to the possibility that the connection we found 5 years ago might still be worth building on. Elise had spent so many years being strong, being solely responsible, that allowing herself to lean into this possibility felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not just for Lucas, but for me." "Well, if this doesn't work, then we'll still be good parents to our son," Nathan finished. "But what if it does work, Elise? What if that weekend wasn't just a beautiful accident, but the beginning of something that got interrupted but never truly ended?" The night air was cool around them, carrying the salt scent of the ocean and the distant sound of waves. The window, they could see Lucas sleeping peacefully on the couch, one arm flung above his head in exactly the same way Nathan slept. "One step at a time," Elise said finally, intertwining her fingers with his. "We start as friends who are raising a child together and see where the path leads. I can work with that." Nathan's smile held the promise of patience and possibility. "We have time now." As if to seal this new understanding, a shooting star blazed briefly across the night sky above them, a fleeting moment of brilliance that left a lingering trail of light. "Mom says if you see a shooting star, you should make a wish," came Lucas's sleepy voice from the doorway, startling them both. "When did you wake up, buddy?" Nathan asked, making room for Lucas as he padded over to squeeze between them. "Just now, did you see it?" Lucas looked between them expectantly. "He did," Elise confirmed, brushing his tousled hair from his forehead. "Did you make a wish?" Lucas nodded solemnly. "I can't tell you or it won't come true." Nathan wrapped an arm around their son's shoulders. "That's true. Some wishes need to be kept secret until the right time." Over Lucas's head, Elise's eyes met Nathan's, and in that moment no words were necessary. Whatever wishes each of them had made, spoken or unspoken, the foundation for their fulfillment was already being built. One day at a time, in the shape of the small family gathering beneath the vast canopy of stars, the bridge between their separate worlds, once broken by misunderstanding and lost chances, was slowly being reconstructed, stronger now for having weathered the storms of separation, sturdy enough to support not just 2 lives, but 3. And, as Lucas pointed excitedly to another star streaking across the heavens, Elise allowed herself to believe that sometimes even wishes made on shooting stars could come true, not in the instantaneous magic of fairy tales, but in the patient, determined work of building something real and lasting from the fragments of what might have been.